paying close attention to Elizabeth Warren and her record, foreign policy tends to be an Achilles heel, and nothing made that clearer than some of the recent statements she made on what's happening in Latin American countries. Now, first, let's start off with her take on Bolivia, which was not good because there was clearly a military coup in Bolivia. This is a story that we've talked about on this show. We gave you the specific reasons why this is absolutely a military coup, but the simple way of understanding this is the military forced Evo Morales, the leader of Bolivia, out of the country. He's gone, and he had won the election, even though an American-backed organization known as the OAS argues that he did not, right? So again, the OAS is 60% funded by the United States, and both Donald Trump and Marco Rubio wanted Evo Morales, a leftist president, out. So that's the context you should know about. But here's what her take on Bolivia was via Twitter. She said, "The Bolivian people deserve free and fair elections as soon as possible. Bolivia's interim leadership must limit itself to preparing for an early legitimate election. Bolivia's security forces must protect demonstrators, not commit violence against them." Now, the reality is there was a coup. She did not call it a coup. And according to Common Dreams, the coup on November 10th resulted in a democratically elected Morales being forced to resign from office. Morales fled Bolivia for Mexico days after Senator Janine Áñez, a right-wing Christian extremist, unilaterally declared herself president.
Right.
So where's the democracy in that, right? And then Ryan Grimm chimed in as well and said the interim leadership has already threatened to arrest elected lawmakers in Morales' party for sedition while killing people in the streets. And by the way, who are they killing in the streets? Protesters, many of whom are indigenous people in Bolivia. So the violence against them, the brutality against them has been absolutely horrific. And Warren's take does differ quite a bit from what we saw from Bernie Sanders. So I'm actually gonna skip ahead, guys. I wanna go to video D2. Recently, Jorge Ramos was asking Bernie Sanders about the situation in Bolivia, and let's hear what he had to say.
You wrote in a tweet that you thought it was a military coup, what happened in Bolivia. Many people have other point of view. They think that Evo Morales had been in power 14 years, that he wanted 5 more, and that he wanted to become a dictator. So what do you think?
No, I don't agree with that assertion. I think Morales did a very good job in alleviating poverty, in giving the indigenous people of Bolivia a voice that they never had before. Now, we can argue about his going for a 4th term, whether that was a wise thing to do.
And they always thought it was a fraud, the election on October the 20th.
Some people think that as well. But at the end of the day, it was the military who intervened in that process and asked them to leave. When the military intervenes, Jorge, in my view, that's called a coup.
So Bernie Sanders is very clear in calling it a coup. You just saw that in the video. And so what do you guys make of this? I mean, for someone who's paying close attention to Elizabeth Warren's record on foreign policy, stuff like this really stands out because she has consistently voted in favor of increasing military funding, military spending. In fact, she offered more than what Trump had asked for. And when our very own Emma Vigeland, one of our reporters, asked her about it, she dodged that question. So I just want to give you the full context. What do you guys think?
So I think much like her comments on the fundamental goodness of capitalism and how it's just this good thing that's only ruined because there's certain bad actors here and there that corrupt the system. But that if we just kind of get those guys out, everything works fine. I think she has a similar view in terms of how the world works, and especially the US's role in the world, which she probably believes is fundamentally good, save for a few mistakes here and there, like Iraq, which was a mistake that killed hundreds of thousands of people, but a mistake nonetheless, rather than seeing it as this sort of comprehensive imperial project. And what that does is it causes her to look at these issues in isolation. Like she's used to taking something like Bolivia and be like, okay, well let me do the homework on Bolivia. Okay, and you don't really need to be an expert on Bolivia to see what's going on. You just have to have a coherent worldview and an understanding of history and how this plays out the same exact way time and time again. It's almost like they have the same script that they're reading over and over again. That in Latin America especially, the vast majority of countries are resource rich and they are dominated by maybe 5 families that own everything in the country. Those 5 families are supported by the United States militarily and through intelligence agencies and through all manner of diplomatic support. And then starting around the 1950s and 1960s, the people of those countries decided they'd had enough and they rebelled against that corrupt arrangement. And the United States did everything possible to stop that. We supported military coups in Guatemala, in Chile, in Brazil, in Argentina. You name it, Cuba, and it's
Chile,
not,
Nicaragua.
It's not even ancient history. We supported a coup in Venezuela in 2002. We supported the coup in Honduras in 2009. It's just what we do, the same script over and over again. So,
and it's always against leftist leaders who run on and win with economic populist campaigns.
Supporting the poor people in their country, which is what Evo Morales did. Evo Morales 14 years ago came to power, first indigenous president in the history of Bolivia. He grew the economy by over 40% in the time that he was there. He reduced poverty by 25%, so reduced it by a quarter.
That's amazing.
And for that crime of daring to direct some of his country's vast resources to the poorest in his society, he was removed from office. And that's fundamentally that's the game, and that's what it is. And anyone who is steeped in this, like Bernie has been his whole career. He invited Noam Chomsky to come speak when he was mayor of Burlington. I mean, he understands the game and how it works.
Yeah, and I'm going to provide some video evidence of that in just a minute. But before I do, Nomiki, do you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, I think you've laid out the history perfectly well. What I'm curious, and we have so many debates right now. It's interesting to me that there has not been one debate on climate change, right?
Right.
And none on foreign policy, because the history of the Democratic Party, there's always a foreign policy debate. When Hillary Clinton was running, it was all about strength. It was a response to being swift-voted in 2004. There were organizations that were founded to literally counter Republicans on foreign policy, to show that the Democratic Party is strong on foreign policy. Yet, while you have Bernie Sanders in this race, there is no foreign policy discussion. So
you're so right.
I'm glad that question was brought up, but it is not being raised appropriately, so that there is a stark dynamic between all of the candidates, including Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders.
Yes, I love that you brought that up as well, because and check out my discussion with Mehdi Hassan on No Filter, because we did discuss the fact that there hasn't been much focus on foreign policy during the debates, but he did a good job in differentiating between Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard when it comes to foreign policy. But I do want to provide some evidence to what Nando said. And by the way, I had no idea that was going to be your commentary.
What did I say?
How Bernie Sanders has really been steeped in these issues. And there was a video that surfaced on Twitter recently that features Bernie. This is back in, I believe, the 1990s. And he's shredding the Clinton treasury over IMF exploitation of the global South, okay? So there's 2 clips. Let's start off with the first one.
The IMF historically does not have a good record in terms of the poor people of various countries. You mentioned Mexico, Mr. Summers, in your pride that Mexico repaid their loan and we got a big interest rate back. Boy, we made money. Do you know what's going on in Mexico today? Do you know that working people have seen a significant decline in their wages? They got millions of kids who are working for no money at all, and you're sitting here telling us how proud you are we made money. So the suffering children and the unemployed workers of Mexico have paid us back, and we're gloating about it. Some of us think that maybe the function of the IMF or the United States government should have picked up the poor people of the world, not push them down further.
That was his take on the IMF then. I'm sure that's his take on the IMF today, because the same issues unfortunately persist. But then he goes into some specifics when it comes to Indonesia, okay? And pay close attention, because it is relevant given the context of the Bolivia story. Take a look.
In terms of Indonesia, this administration has an exceedingly strong commitment to human rights. They have missed something, but those are the ones that
But once again, I gather you're not telling General Suharto to free the leader of the union movement who's rotting in jail now. despite the fact that our law requires us to do that. You're not saying that.
I could repeat what I'm
You're not saying that.
I am sticking with what I just said.
Right. Well, I'm sure that people of Indonesia do not appreciate that.
I agree with the fervor with which you deal with them. The people in Indonesia are going to be vastly worse off if we can't, working with the international community, help Indonesia solve the problem that they now face.
People of Indonesia have the right to stand up and fight for their rights, and their leader is in jail now, and you are tolerating that situation.
I certainly agree they have a right to stand up and fight for their rights, and I think inappropriately jailing people, and I actually don't want to comment on the particular situation, inappropriately jailing people is something that is most reprehensible and we view with the greatest concern.
But we are giving him billions of dollars and not asking him to free his political prisoners.
Yeah.
So look, I think records matter, and I think consistency matters. And he has spoken out against the political imprisonment of people like Lula da Silva in Brazil. No other presidential candidate has mentioned that. No other presidential candidate has called what happened in Bolivia what it is, a coup. Bernie Sanders is the only one who's done that. And so these things matter because it's not just about domestic policy. All of this stuff is connected, right? And if your worldview on American foreign policy is, no, we just want to spread democracy, we're the good guys, and you're just, discounting, or more importantly, like failing to acknowledge how disastrous US foreign policy has been and how much it's actually destabilized various regions of the world, well then you're either asleep or you're being disingenuous.
Because democracy is a brand to these people. It's not actually, if anybody is questioning at this point, it is not about democracy. Democracy is letting people self-determine what their futures are, whether it's Puerto Rico on our own land, letting them self-determine, or the people of Bolivia, letting them self-determine who their leader is and what kind of economy they want and what rights they want. It's our side is democracy building is essentially oligarch empowering.
That's right. We want to place a leader in charge who's going to give us, the Americans, what we want. Yep, that's what we've done in several Latin American countries. And to that end, Elizabeth Warren's views on Venezuela, also disastrous. She's actually very much in line with Donald Trump on that issue. So I just have one more video to show you. This is her speaking to, I believe, one of the Pod Save podcasts. Let's take a look.
The Trump administration has recognized the National Assembly President Juan Guaido as the president and encouraged a bunch of other countries to follow suit. And frankly, what was a pretty impressive diplomatic play by them. He also sanctioned Venezuela's oil industry, which is a major step, which could cut off all their supply of dollars and their ability to have an economy. Do you agree with those two steps, recognizing Guaido and the sanctions on the oil sector? And if so, I mean, how do we back up a step as bold as saying there's a new president and it's this guy that we named, especially given our history in Latin America?
So I want to broaden this one out just a little bit. Start with the fact that Maduro is obviously a dictator. He's terrible. He's stolen this election. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for the people of Venezuela. So that's part one. Part two, this notion of using our diplomatic tools, I'm all for it. I think recognition, I think getting our allies to do it, it's a way to bring diplomatic pressure. Economic sanctions, yeah, I support economic sanctions, but now we're going to start, we got to turn the dial some here. We have to offer humanitarian help at the same time.
She also backs Juan Guaido, who is the person who the US wanted to put in charge in the most recent failed military coup in Venezuela. Yeah,
I mean, the fact that she takes a side in the conflict in Venezuela, which is developed into pretty serious social conflict between two large sectors of the population, just shows the game right there. I mean, yes, the situation in Venezuela has deteriorated to a point where it's probably wise to get some sort of international commission to oversee new elections, not recognize the right-wing loon who can't gather enough supporters to even launch. They just tried to do another big demonstration. It was a total disaster. You shouldn't be picking sides in this situation. If the situation has gotten so poor that you need to oversee new elections, then yes, or internationally seen over elections would probably be for the best. But to pick one side over the other is just is lunacy at this point.
Real quick on that, I find it amazing that she picks sides in that, but she can't pick sides when it comes to whether or not this is a coup or not, or taking a strong stand on so many issues that determine a strong stand. So siding with Trump and a far right winger, that's pretty bold.
So, look, she needs to be clear in how she would pursue these foreign policy decisions. Right now, we're going off of a podcast interview and a tweet. I think that it's an issue that she's purposely stayed away from because of her record. And by the way, her record's not so great when it comes to picking sides with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So these are things to pay close attention to. It's not just about domestic policy. It's not just about who has the most detailed blog post. It's about who would be the best leader comprehensively.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.